Hi everyone, my name is Federico Tartarini, and in this video I'm going to show you how to deploy on Cloud Run this Flask application. This is part 2 of the video series that I've released on Cloud Run on how to deploy and build Python application. In the first video I showed you how to deploy a very simple Flask application, which was showing just a simple message. If you want to learn more on how I did that, or if you don't have a good knowledge on how Cloud Run works, I would encourage you to look at that video, and I will put a link here at the top of this video, here in the right corner. So just click on that link and you will be redirected to the part 1 of this video series. But if you have already seen that video, now we can go ahead and deploy a full Flask application. The Flask application that we're going to deploy is going to be this one. We're going to deploy this website, which is quite complex. It includes this time some HTML, some JavaScript, and the backend has been written in Flask. So this is what we're going to deploy. Of course, in your case, you're going to deploy your Flask application. You don't have to deploy the same thing that I'm doing, but I just want to show you all the steps that you need to follow. Because we are building a complex application this time, and we cannot type all the file online on the Google shell, we're going to use GitHub. So we're going to push all our changes locally to GitHub. We're going to push it to a repository, and then we're going to pull our changes inside the Google Cloud Console. So in this video you will also need a GitHub account to follow along with me. In this video we're going to use the Cloud Shell terminal as we did in part 1, and I want to show you how to do that because this way is quite simple, because you don't have to install anything on your computer. In part 3, however, of this video series, I'm going to show you how you can compile locally, build, and deploy your application via gcloud. So if you want to check that, just go to part 3 of my video. On the other hand, if you want to use the Cloud Shell, you can follow along in this video. So let's start. The first thing that we need to do is to open our project in a text editor on our computer. So as you can see, I have it open here on my computer, and this is my project. My main file is called comfort.py. This comfort.py contains the Flask application, defines all the routes where user can actually visit. For instance, as you can see in here, you have the different type of routes. So there is the main one, there is the ranges, en, and these are all the tabs, all the different like URL that we have here. So we have en, compare, and so forth. So this is our Flask application. I will not explain in detail how to build this Flask application itself, because the scope of this video is only to show you how to deploy on Cloud Run. So before we start, I just would like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you find this type of content interesting. At any time, if you have any questions, or if you want to just say something, just leave a comment down below in the video description. So I will try to answer your question as soon as possible. Let me actually increase a bit the font here. Great, now we increase a bit the font, so it's going to be easier for you to see. And we have our Flask application, and we are going to test it locally. So in order to test it locally on PyCharm, I can just click here on the green arrow here, or I can click here at the top on Comfort. So I'm going to run it locally. This is going to open a terminal, and it's going to say that it's running on this on my local machine. So let's go and check our application that is running. Despite I'm setting the port, the host to be 0.0.0.0, on Windows you will find that is running on localhost. So it's 127.0.0.1, and the port is 8080, as we have specified here in our Flask application. So the first thing that we will need to do is to test that it's working locally. Once we have tested it's working locally, we can add a couple of files that are required if we want to deploy our application on Cloud Run. So the first file that we are going to add, and we need to add, otherwise it's not going to work on Cloud Run, is, as we did previously in part 1, is a Dockerfile. So let's go here, create a new file, and we're going to call it Dockerfile. We want to add it to Git, yes, so let's add it to Git. Otherwise, if you're not using PyCharm, you might have to add it to Git manually, and you can do that in the terminal. So you can just go here and you say git add, and then you say the name of your file. But PyCharm does it automatically for me, so just to let you know. And inside this Docker file, we need to copy some code. I'm going to copy this code from the official Google Cloud tutorial, but then we're going to edit it based on our requirements. Okay? So let me collapse this tab, and let's go and edit our file. So the first thing that we need to edit is to change the Python version, and we're going to change it to Python 3. So here we just need to change a couple of things. We need to change the import of Python. In my specific case, I want to use Python 3 version. If you want to find out more about which Python versions you can use, you can follow this link here, and you can see all the different type of Python versions that you can use, and they are compatible with Docker. I will put this link down in the description, so don't worry too much about it. As I previously mentioned in my previous video, we don't have to change this line of code at all, as long as our file, so our main file, is inside the project directory. So as you can see here, comfort.py, which is our main entry file in our Flask application, is inside the main directory. So we don't have to change anything, and we can keep this code as it is. What we have to change on the other end is this line here, because as you can see from the example that Google is providing, we are only installing Flask and Gunicorn. However, my application has a requirement.txt file and requires all these packages to work. So let's fix that. We just have to go back to our file. Let me collapse the tab, and we're going to change this line a little bit. So we're going to duplicate the line, and in the first part we're going to say pip install r, and then we're going to say requirements. So this is going to take care of installing all our requirements when we compile and we build the application inside the Docker container. So again, you just have to reference this file here. So we say pip install r and then requirements. Then we also need to install Gunicorn. So this is a very important thing to notice, and I think that I want to spend a little bit of time to explain. So our application, as you can see from my requirement.txt file, may or may not require Gunicorn. So in this case, it does require Gunicorn, so we're going to install it in the requirements anyway. But if you don't need Gunicorn in the requirements, leave this line below here, which is pip install Gunicorn. Of course, if you have already installed it as a part of the requirements, that is not going to do anything. It's going to say that this package has already been installed and everything is going to be fine. But if your application by default does not need Gunicorn and you don't include this line here, eventually your application is not going to run. And why is it not going to run? Because Google Cloud and a Docker container, in order to work, they need actually Gunicorn, as you can see here from the last line of our code that we have added to the Docker file. So here we are binding the port of our application. We are specifying the time of workers and threads, and just have a look at the official Google documentation if you want to find out more how you can change this variable. But one last most important thing that we need to change is this last line here of this command. As I showed you before, my application, the main file in my application, is not called main, but is called comfort. So let me show you actually my project directory, and I showed you just before. As you can see here, the entry point of my Flask application is not main, but is comfort. So we have to change that, and we need to change that main to comfort. And we don't need to change this, because if I go inside comfort, you can see that my Flask application that we have initialized at the beginning of the code is actually called app. But if you change this name and you call it application or something else, then in the Dockerfile, you also need to change that. So this one will have to be the same as you define inside your main Flask file. Great, we have created this file. Now we need to create just one more file. And this additional file that we need to create is the dockerginore. So let's create another file which is called .dockerginore. We add it as well to the Git repository, and we are going to just copy some boilerplate code and we're going to change it based on our requirements. So this is the dockerginore file. What we are going to also ignore inside this dockerginore file, it depends on our website, okay? So in my specific application, this website folder is not really needed for the Flask application to work, is the documentation website. So I'm going to ignore that file, and for the same reason, I'm also going to ignore these docs. Let me actually put them in order. So from the top in alphabetical order. So all these other folders are needed, especially in your application. I'm sure you're going to have the static and you're going to have the templates. So this is a bare bone requirement for any Flask application. So don't ignore those files because those are needed. All the yellow files here are already in the gitignore file, so they're not going to be pushed to the GitHub repository, so don't worry too much about these node modules as long as you have already ignored them inside the gitignore file, because they are ignored already by Git. So we're going to push these changes to GitHub and then we're going to pull them into the Cloud Console. So since you have already ignored them inside here, don't worry too much about that. Then we are ignoring our website. Then we are going to ignore a couple of other files, which are package.lock.json, and then we're going to ignore this package.json, and then the README is already ignored here, and we need the requirements. So that's it. So that's all that we have done. We need to do for our project in order to push it to Google Cloud Run. Now we need to push all our changes to GitHub. So you need to either go onto your GitHub account and then create a new repository. I will just show you how to do that. And so we can go here, we can create a new repository and we can call it example YouTube. And then it can be public or private, doesn't matter. And then we can create our repository. If it's public, it's better because when we are going to import it into our Google Cloud Run, it's going to be much simpler. If you have a private repository, I would really encourage you to look at my third video, which is going to show you how to use gcloud. So we are going to skip all these middleman step of using GitHub. So here we are going to keep this repository public and we are going to hit on create repository. Now you have to, if you have an existing, if you want to just push to this repository, we can just use this command here, which we are going to add to Git, this remote repository, and we're going to push all our changes. Of course, on your computer, you need to have Git installed on your computer. And you need to have, of course, a GitHub account. So in this case, you can just look for Git install, and you can follow this instruction to install it on your operative system. I have it already installed it on my computer, Git, and I have already a GitHub account. And in fact, this project is already synced to another GitHub repository. So I'm going to skip this step here because I can already push to the my GitHub account repository that is linked to this project. So let's do that. So I'm going to do Ctrl-K here on my IDE. We just need to write a commit message, and the commit message could be like added files for Google Cloud Run. So now that we have committed, add the message, we can do commit and push. So this is going to, we have some issues, SonarLint is finding some issue, don't worry too much about those. We're going to say commit anyway, and we can push our changes to our GitHub repository. So if I go here, online, on my GitHub, and I move to these different branches that we just created. So here, online, we have all our file, and as you can see now we have Dockerfile and the dockerginore file that we just created 15 seconds ago. So now let's click here and we copy this URL. So we're going to clone this one into the Google Cloud Console. So let's open this page and let's go inside our Google Cloud Console. If you don't know how to access the Google Cloud Console, please check my previous video, part 1, in which I show you how to access the Google Cloud Console. Of course, you will also need a project to be created, and you will need a Google Cloud account to follow along with me in this video. But please check my previous part of the video, because you can learn all those things. So inside here, as you can see, we have the same project directory that we had before, the example YouTube, which is the example project that we created into the first part of this video series. But now we're going to say git clone. Git is already installed by default on the Cloud Shell, and we're going to say git clone, and it actually hasn't copied, so we just have to copy this one here. So we just going to say git clone, and we are going to clone this repository. Great, so we can do a cd into comfort tool, and then we have our ls, and we have all our things. As you can see here, because I've cloned this repository, I'm not inside the right branch, because here we have different branches. So we have Cloud Run, but we have the master branch, which is default. So the first thing that we'll need to do is check out the right branch. So let's go back here, git branch, and then -a. Sorry, I misspelled that. This is going to actually tell us all the repository and all the branches, all the branches that we have inside. And we're going to say git check out, and we're going to check out the one that we want to work on. So it's going to be cloud-run. As you can see, now we have switched to a new branch, which is Cloud Run. Let's check that we are in the right branch, and we are, because can you see, the file that they are inside are actually changed. And these are the files that we actually want, because this is our comfort.py, we have our Dockerfile that we have created, and so forth. So now that we have moved here, let's move to the editor. So we have done all the things that we needed to do with the Google Cloud Shell. Now let's move to the editor. We can move to the editor by clicking here at the top, Open Editor. Great. So before we had only the example YouTube, now we also have the comfort tool, and here inside we have the Dockerfile that we just have created. Let's go and check the Dockerfile. Let's make sure that everything is fine. We can see that we have comfort and then app as we change, and we have pip install gunicorn. Okay. As I previously mentioned, this is not really needed this time because our requirement already contains gunicorn, but it's very important that you know about that, because I was deploying another application which did not need the gunicorn, and then I spent a lot of time trying to fix this issue. So we're almost there. Now we need to do as we did previously. We need to just deploy our application on Google Cloud Run, because we have already tested locally. So we know already that it's working. So we can click here at the bottom, and we're going to say deploy to Cloud Run. We need to authorize the Cloud Shell, so let's do that. So we're going to need to create a service, and that's fine. What is the name of the service? It's going to be example YouTube. and then in this case my application is called comfort, and then tool. You need to specify where you want to, in which region you want to deploy your application. Just pick the region closer to where you think most of your users are going to be, and we want to be fully managed. So that's important that is ticked. We want authentication here, so we want to allow an authenticated invocation because we want that everyone can actually access our application. We don't want that people need to have required authentication. We just want everyone, this application is going to be public. Then we just don't have to change anything down here, so we can click on deploy. This is going to take a bit of time, and I'm going to just fast forward this part, and I will show you when actually our application is fully deployed. Great, our application is now fully deployed and is available to the public, and we can just access it following this link. So if I click here, follow this link, I can now access my full application, which is deployed with Google Cloud Run. The first time we try to open it is going to take just a little bit of time because it has to load up. But here, as you can see, now my application is fully deployed at this URL, and is exactly as the same application that we have locally. As you can see, I can toggle between these two windows and it's the same application. So let's actually go back here to the Google Cloud Console. So we can close here, we can close the terminal for a second, and we can refresh this page here. And we can see our application, example YouTube Comfort Tool, which is very important, as I explained in part 1 of my video, that in under authentication here it says allow unauthenticated. As I previously explained in my previous video, you can also manage custom domains by clicking here, so you just have to follow the tutorial, but this goes beyond the scope of this video, so I'm not going to cover that in this specific video. So now the last thing that I want to show you is how to upgrade our application and release a new application. Because let's say that now we want to change our application because we are no longer happy with our application. So how can we change and deploy a new version of the application? So let's go back to our code editor here, and let's go into the comfort tool here. Let's go to the comfort file here and change something. So we're going to change something into our application. Let me bring here on this side, and we can open our application, and instead of calling it CBE thermal comfort tool, we're going to want to change something. So let's go and do that. So we just have to go into templates, index. That's specifically in my application. Of course, in your application is going to change that because you can change something else. So we're going to say CBE thermal comfort tool, and we're going to say CBE thermal comfort tools. Let me save this file, and since the debug mode is false, this is not going to update automatically. So we need to rerun comfort. Great, so we rerun our application and we can see that now says CBE thermal comfort tools. So now we made a change, and we can see this change that is reflected here because this new file is in blue. Of course, this is going to vary based on your IDE. If you want also to learn more on how to integrate and to use Git and integrate Git and GitHub with PyCharm, I have a video and I will put a link here at the top, and you can just check that out. And I have also a lot of other videos on how to use PyCharm that you might find useful. Honestly, I think it's one of the best IDE out there, so I would really encourage you to just have a look at it, explore it, and start with it. Especially also another thing that I really like, if you are in data science and you need to write paper, is how you can integrate it with also LaTeX, and you can compile your document directly inside PyCharm. But let's go back to our video and let's go and push this new change. So we're going to say Control K, and we have changed the index file. So let's say change the index file, and then we're going to push these changes. to the GitHub repository, so we're going to commit anyway. So we're going to push our changes. We go back here to the official repository and let's refresh this page. Great, and it should say like inside templates 12 seconds ago, and we have changed the index file. Fantastic. So we can just open this page, we can go back here to the services, and we can activate again the Cloud Shell. Great, the Cloud Shell is now activated again, so we can just do ls, and then we can do cd, and then we can go comfort tool, and then we just have to say git pull. Great, we can see actually our change here. We can see that there was one file change and the index file has changed. Now we say git branch, and we just want to check that we are still in the Cloud Run branch. And here you can see that we are in the star. There is a star, so we're inside still Cloud Run. So let's open with the editor. We can go again and verify that going into templates, and we go index, and we should see that it says CB thermal comfort tools. Let me actually look for it. So CB thermal comfort tools. So great, our change has been reflected here as well. So the last thing that we need to do is to deploy again this latest version of the tool that we have just created. So again, we go here in Cloud Code, and then we say deploy to Cloud Run. One thing that I forgot to mention before was that if you get a message, you will have to say what is the project related to this specific service. And before, that message didn't pop up because maybe just have a project in my Google Cloud account. But if it comes up, just select the right project where you want to deploy this application. So previously we created a new service because we wanted to release a new application. Now we just want to update our application. So we select the same service as before. And as you can see, we can see that we have already the previous setting. So it's managed, US Central, and this is already the service name. So basically here we don't have to change anything. We can just go down and click deploy. This again is going to take a little bit of time. We can show the detail log. It's going to take a little bit of time. And then once it's done, I'm going to just fast forward this part. We are going to be able to see the new changes. Great, everything was fine, the build was successful, and we just have to, as before, the link hasn't changed because our application is the same service. We can just follow this link and we can see the new updated version, which is going to be the same as the old one. So let me just close these two tabs while it's loading, and now we say CBE thermal comfort tools. So great, we were able to deploy a new version of our application. I really hope you find this video useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can actually use gcloud to streamline this process. So we will never have to leave our IDE, so we can work all inside PyCharm or any other IDE. We can work inside our terminal. We can use gcloud to build and then put it inside a container and then send directly the application to our online service. So if you want to find out more, just check my next video. I'm going to put a link here at the top in the video, and you can click on that and there will be a link down in the video description. See you the next time.